Right lads, I'm your host, Man And His Kebab, and this week I faced a dilemma. So I've been very busy this month between videos and other things in my private life. When you ask what videos, I've started a channel which I talk about football. Link for it's up here or here. I'm not sure which side is the right side. So this left me with a problem of deciding what to talk about this week. So as I sat down, controller in hand, scrolling through my games, my eyes instantly darted to one game that I've played religiously for years, Battlefield 1. When it comes to the sheer sense of fun and freshness, no game's multiplayer has kept me playing for nearly the amount of time that this one has, and I was yet to figure out why until today. So I plugged in my Elgato, clicked play, loaded up the game, and here's the results. As I said before, I have poured literal days into this game, as many others have. Even Battlefield 4 I haven't poured as much time into, and that's one of my favourite games of all time. And see, Battlefield 1, it doesn't strike you as a fun game at first, and that probably has a lot to do with its setting, which is of course World War I. A war known for its grueling battles that consisted of men standing in muddy, damp, disease-ridden trenches for weeks, even months upon end, before finally getting the signal to charge, bayonets fixed, towards certain death at the hands of a hail of machine gun and rifle fire. Now of course the game does take creative liberties here, because indeed, that sort of reality translated to a game wouldn't exactly make for a fun experience. Personally, I'm quite comfortable here sitting in my room, knowing the only German enemy I'll face was the lad who thrashed me 5-0 on FIFA Ultimate Team. The setting is of course seen most predominantly in the game's maps. When you look across the maps of Battlefield 1, none of them feel inherently familiar to us as players, which isn't exactly a bad thing. This isn't like playing a game set in World War II with the usual D-Day map in the ruins of Stalingrad, or a map set in the deserts of North Africa. Instead, we are presented with a collision of worlds between the architecture of the 1800s, now being crushed by the technological developments of war. The ruins of destroyed tanks, huge artillery pieces, the hulking remains of metal dreadnoughts. It's a setting we as players were never exactly exposed to, because most developers had written it off as too archaic and unfamiliar for modern audiences. However, for some reason, this still works incredibly well. No map feels the same. The hills of Monte Grappa, the streets of Amiens, or the huge walls of Fell Fortress, all offering a unique look rather than just a map in a Chinese city, other city map in China, a complex in snowy Russia, another city map in China. These maps also play a lot more uniquely than most maps in previous Battlefield games, in terms of engagement distances and using destructible environments to your advantage, which is also helped by the game's weapons. The weapons in this game are probably the most diverse of any shooter ever. From the old 1800s revolvers and breech-loading rifles, to the high-tech, for the time, automatic rifles and submachine guns, which granted appear a lot more than they ever did in real life, with a lot of them simply being prototypes, showing how quickly the technology was advancing at the time, even if it was just advancing so that we could kill other humans more efficiently than before. Now there is a few downsides to a lot of these guns, especially the DLC ones. A lot of them are thrown into categories that they don't particularly belong in, with something like the bar being a far cry from something like the MG15, yet they're both classified as support weapons. A lot of these guns are also quite useless. Weapon balance in this game isn't exactly a thing due to the disparity between weapons. Not everything is a 30-round assault rifle with a slightly different spray pattern. In this game you can have a 5-round rifle going up against a 26-round automatic one, and no, the former doesn't do nearly the amount of damage you'd expect it to. Using some of these weaker weapons can serve as a challenge however, and the game does actively encourage you to use these weapons through DLC challenges and XP challenges. This imbalance in weapons does have one advantage however, and that is that it makes the classes pretty balanced. Assault is pretty much relegated to short range engagements, while medics arguably have the best weapons yet the worst equipment. You'll pretty much exclusively be using med packs and steroids and a needle. Vehicles in this game also strike a good balance between not being too overpowered, but also not being too useless at the same time. If you become incredibly skilled in a plane, you can wreak havoc on the enemy team. But by the same metric, anyone on the ground could take you out if you're not careful, simply using an LMG. Choosing a heavy bomber gives you a lot more power to bomb the living crap out of anybody on the ground, but at the same time you're a huge, slow-moving target that's vulnerable not only to enemy fighters, but also fire from the ground. Dogfights are also a lot more engaging. Gone are the days of locking on with a missile and then finishing them off with a gunburst. Now you have to slowly wear down the enemy plane while also making sure to repair your own. Tanks also have this problem of being vulnerable to pretty much everything on the ground, although even more so than planes. Picking a light tank gives you more mobility, but you now have less armor and can be taken out by a few grenades and a couple of rockets. Heavy tanks are a lot more heavily armored, but aren't exactly effective unless they're crewed properly, due to how easily it is to get swarmed due to your low mobility and blind spots. Horses are kind of the oddball here. At the game's release they used to be incredibly overpowered, but now it's very easy to be killed by one guy with a Hell Regal vehicle if you're not careful. A lot of these vehicles, however, are made entirely obsolete thanks to behemoths. Whether it's the armored train, Zeppelin, or Dreadnought. These things can be found in the game's Operations game mode, which in all honesty is probably the only game mode you'll be playing, especially these days. It's basically Rush on the scale of Conquest, which makes both of them game modes redundant, and although there are other game modes like War Pigeons and Back to Basics, where you're forced to use bolt action rifles, you'll be hard pressed to find servers playing these game modes nowadays. Finally, we come to this game's brutality. This game, like Call of Duty World at War, does not hold back in showing how brutal war truly is. Whether it be lunging your bayonet into the enemy's chest, striking him over the head with a club, or burning him alive, all the while you dodge explosions that could very easily blow you to pieces, truly highlights how cruel World War I was for the everyday soldier. And even this is a far cry from what those everyday men experienced. Of course, this is still a video game, so it's never going to fully capture the true horrors of war, especially if you're like me who runs in with a limpet charge into a crowded room to get multi-kills, but Battlefield 1 is one of the few games that doesn't dance around the horrors of war, even if it is still used largely for entertainment. So that was Battlefield 1's multiplayer summed up as best as I can in the time I was given. If you haven't yet played it, I'd highly recommend, seeing as it's pretty much dirt cheap and it still has a decent player base to this day. But anyways, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I'll have another video coming up next week. I'm recording the two of these back to back, which is why everything looks the same. But anyways, with all that said, I'll see you all next time.